reader. Okay? This is just a way to look at it. Now, God is communicating his message to us, and he's, that's how it is. We're understanding his knowledge. But in the middle of a story, there are times when a reader will be elevated in the sense of they're going to know more information about what's going on than the character. Okay? So God is revealing truth, and the character is going to be, the reader is going to be elevated, so they know more information than the character. Now, what would be an example of this? Where do we see this in the text? When is the reader told more information in the last few chapters of Joseph than what the character knows? We know we read to the end. That's true, right? But just in the story itself. So let's think we're reading through Genesis 38. That's a story with Judah and Tamar. Tamar dresses up as a prostitute. She stands on the road. And what is it? We know that as the reader. Uh-oh, that's his daughter-in-law. But what does the scripture tell us? It says, Judah doesn't know. So you see, we have knowledge, revelation, that God's given us that the character doesn't have. Kind of pushes us up, right? So it helps us to see the story in a different way. If you didn't know that Tamar was a prostitute and Judah didn't know, you're just kind of be going along and you're just kind of learning as you go. But instead you know. So there's a lesson here. Uh-oh, I've already know what's happening. This is bad. At the same time, there's aspects where the character will have more information than the reader. The character is going to have more information than the reader. These are just different ways that the Scripture is written. And each one has a purpose to help draw out an aspect of what's trying to be communicated. There's one more, and it's this. This is what I think I've labeled as even-handed. So while sometimes our knowledge will be boosted up over the characters, sometimes the character's knowledge will be boosted up over ours, a lot of times we'll be on the same plane. We will be learning. Great example of this was Mark. Do we know how it was going to be resolved with the man and his daughter? No. We could read ahead, but as you read, you don't know. It doesn't say, the man came looking for his little daughter to be healed, parentheses, John does this all the time, and John would say, and he healed her. And then it goes back to the story, right? Mark doesn't do that, which is really strange for Mark, because what is Mark about? Immediately. Mark never hides anything. He tells you what's going to happen next. So if Mark holds information, like he just did in Mark chapter 5, that's like, we got to stop here. Why is he doing that? And I think he's doing that to build anticipation. Like, you think this father wants to save his daughter? Well, there's a Father in heaven that wants to save you even more. Do you see it? Wow, that tension is incredible. But there's another one, even-handed, where we both have the same amount of information, and that means that God is totally in control. He has all power, and we're learning as the text goes along. This is what we're going to discover in Genesis 40. Again, this is a really slight, nuanced thing to look at, but it happens within the text. Sometimes the reader has more information than the character. Sometimes the character has more information. Sometimes we're on the same plane. For this specific text, it's right here. Why would that be important? Why, if we're coming to the interpretation of dreams that only God knows, why is it important that the characters and the reader are placed on the same plane of knowledge? Yeah, this is a section that says, you have no power. God is the ultimate authority. He is going to reveal it. There's people who come to church and say, well, I've had a vision, or I've had a dream, or I have this special gift, and they try and kind of place themselves above people. Well, this text even puts us in the same place. So you have no idea what's coming. You don't know how God's going to interpret it. Again, it's a small, nuanced thing, but it's interesting, and you'll start to see this in other scriptures and go, why is this doing? Why am I being told what's going to happen before the characters know? Why do the characters already know what's happening before I know? There's reasons for this. This one, we're on the same plane. And part of this knowledge, which is going to come into play in this story, and I'm just going to talk about it right now, since differences in knowledge are often the source of irony, I think it's important to look at that next. So what's irony? When you hear the word irony, what's irony? When someone says, well, that's ironic, what does that mean? Anybody? Irony? Come on, Avery, you had to do this in English class, right? And you're like, sleeping. Irony. Here's a good definition. Irony is the result of contrast without the need for explanation. And it normally relates to an imbalance in knowledge. An imbalance in knowledge. We're going to see irony throughout, especially at the end of this, as Joseph makes a play on words, and he's going to bless one guy and curse the other with the same exact words. So that's kind of some of the themes that I want you to hold in your mind. Now we're going to study through Genesis 38, or Genesis 40 rather. So let's open it up here. Genesis 40. So remember, Joseph was sent to prison. He was sent to prison by his master, who very likely didn't believe the words of his wife, but he had no option because he kind of lost face, so he had to get Joseph out of the situation. Actually, it's probably good for Joseph too. And we find this in Genesis 39, verse 20. So Joseph's master took him and put him into the jail, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and there he was in jail. We remember his master, Genesis 39, verse 1. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of the captain of the bodyguard. Remember we talked about he's a captain of butchers, right? He's a captain executioner. Probably the better way to think that. So he's in the worst situation, but if God works it out for good, this guy puts him in jail. We're actually going to find he's in the basement of his house. That's where he's in jail. Interesting, right? So he didn't even get him out of the house. He's like, you're too much of a blessing. I'm just going to put you in the basement. I'll keep you away from my wife. Can't make this story up. Genesis 40. So then these things came about after these things. So after this whole drama with Potiphar's wife and Potiphar and Joseph in prison, he's in prison, the chief jailer's trusting him. The cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt offended their lord, the king of Egypt. Offended is the same word for sin in the Hebrew. Very interesting as you start to consider the story as a whole, because what did Joseph say to Potiphar's wife? I cannot do this great sin. Thrown in jail. Now these guys have offended or sinned against the king of Egypt, and they're in jail. So they're all in jail. Pharaoh was furious with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. Now that's what we see. We see the same thing, the cupbearer and the baker. They're like, man, we're in trouble, and we're seeing they're in trouble. He's furious. Looks like he's probably going to kill them. We have the same amount of information that they do. So he put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard. Guys, catch this. In the jail, the same place where Joseph was in prison. Wait a second. He put them in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard. Who's the captain of the bodyguard? Potiphar. So they're in his house. The same place where Joseph was imprisoned. So Joseph is in a prison underneath Potiphar's house. And the chief jailer is basically Potiphar's right-hand man. So Potiphar takes him down to the basement. He goes, wink, wink, nod, nod. This guy's really helpful. You should put him in charge of everything. There's too much trouble upstairs. Is my wife. The jailer's like, okay. And Joseph continues to be blessed. So you see, this anger that we thought he's not going to kill him. He wants to put him in a good position. He's angry at his wife. The captain of the bodyguard put Joseph in charge of them, and he took care of them or ministered to them or served them. And they were in confinement for some time. So Joseph's been in jail for some time. These men come to jail, and they spend a period of time there. It's days upon days. After some time, after these days, we're going to now kind of go into the main scene here. Then the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt, who were confined in jail, both had a dream the same night, each man with his own dream, and each dream with his own interpretation. Now, it's kind of translated a little funny in mine. I don't know if in your version it probably has a lot of italics there too. Own dream, and each dream, and its own dream. The idea here is what they're telling us is each man individually had a dream. And each dream has its own interpretation, separate interpretation, which is interesting. Why? Because what dreams have we experienced so far? Joseph's dream. How many dreams has he dreamed? I think it's 2, right? Maybe it's 3? 2? Thanks, Ruthie. 2. And do those dreams seem to have the same or different interpretation? Seems same, right? This one says 2 dreams, 2 different interpretations. Okay. That's what we know. We know exactly what the characters see. So see how they're keeping us on the same plane of information? It doesn't say they both dreamed a dream and there's one dream. No, they both dreamed dreams, separate dreams. So us and the characters know the same amount of information, but we're sort of in the dark. What's this dream? Verse 6. When Joseph came to them in the morning and observed them, behold, they were dejected. They were sad in face. You could say downcast in face. So they had this dream given from God. We talked about that culturally, whether you're Jew or Egyptian, you understand that God gives dreams. They both have this dream in prison, and Joseph comes in, and they're both bummed out, sad, downcast. Why would they be this? Why if you had a dream in prison, apparently God gives dreams, why would you be downcast? Why would they both be downcast, even though they both had different dreams and both had different interpretations? Why would they both be down? Something disturbing about the dream? Yeah. They don't know the interpretation, right? That's what the text tells us. They say, hey, we'd really like to know the interpretation. Another thing historically is, especially in Egypt, people would go to temples of gods and they would try to go to sleep there, so the god of that temple would give them a dream. In fact, there's so many people sleeping in the temple, they had to make up some new rules. Like, it's too packed here. This isn't a hostel, right? And no vacancies tonight. So you go to the temple of the sun god, you get some sun dreams, you go to the temple, you go here, you go there, you get all these different dreams. The place was really important for the dream. So if you're in a dark hole in the ground, underneath the house of the executioner, and Pharaoh is furious at you, who is basically a god himself, your dream's going to have a good or a bad interpretation. What do you think? Yeah, bad. Oh no, right? This is horrible. This is the worst case scenario. I'd rather not dream a dream. I dreamed a dream. Oh no. They don't really. They're sad. They don't want to tell it. But Joseph's not really fazed by that because he's not Egyptian in the sense of religiously. He's not Egyptian. He is of Yahweh. We've seen that earlier in chapter 39. He affiliates himself with God. And he's going to come in verse 6. So when Joseph came in to the morning, observed them, behold, they were dejected, downcast. I believe it's a similar a word that's used in Genesis with Cain, who's downcast. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were with him in confinement in his master's house, why are your faces so sad? Great question. Joseph's right to the chase here. That's how he is. Then they said to him, we have had a dream, and there is no one to interpret it. Now this is interesting, and maybe kind of reveals maybe a little discrepancy in the knowledge and the reading positions, because they said, we have had a dream. They put their dream together. We have had a dream, or we've literally dreamed a dream, and there's no one to interpret it. So the narrator tells us they've each dreamed a dream with its own interpretation, but they say, we've dreamed a dream. Meaning, we both have dreamed one dream. There's kind of a connection there, a unity there. They don't see the distinction, at least not yet. So whatever his interpretation is probably mine. Whatever his lot is probably my lot, because we're both dreaming in this house of death. And it's not good. Why are your face so sad? Joseph said, then they said, we have dreamed a dream, and there was no one to interpret it. That would be typical in the temples of these gods. They would dream a dream, and then of course, you got to make some money off of it, so the priest would interpret the dream. Then Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Basically, does not true knowledge and revelation belong to God? Really important. Isn't it according to Him? Beautiful statement, incredible statement. This is something you can think Him considering about as He considers His own dreams and even His life. Doesn't God not know all things, even though a lot of times we're kept in the dark, even in this hole in the ground? But then He says this really interesting thing where He now is going to connect Himself with God. He says, do not all interpretations belong to God? And then He says what? Tell it to me. Basically, hey, I'm a vessel for God. I'm going to be able to interpret this. I'm going to go to God, and He's going to give me the interpretation. So we find the interpretation here, starting in verse 9. And they're going to tell him. Yeah, right. If he is in charge of the whole prison house, man, he's a lot like a priest of a temple. So let's tell him. Let's see what he gives us. Verse 9. I mean, this stuff never works anyways, right? You go to the temple, you dream in, Ra's house, and they tell you some dreams. It doesn't work anyways. So let's appease him. Verse 9. So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream, behold, there was a vine in front of me, and on the vine there were 3 branches, and it was budding. Its blossoms came out, and its clusters produced ripe grapes. Uh-oh. So he tells him the dream. There's a vine, it's growing up, it's kind of in accord with what he does. He's the chief cupbearer. There's a vine and it bears grapes, it's blossoming, it's fruiting, and the dream continues. Now, Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. We think about words, we talked about words last time, repetitions of words. Is my hand an important word? Right, remember? It's in Joseph's hand, it's in Potiphar's wife's hand, now we have a cup in the hand. Now, Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, so I took the grapes, and I squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. Literally translated, Pharaoh's palm. Different. He switches it. He says, it's in my hand, but I put it into Pharaoh's palm. It's an intimate understanding, like it's like right into his palm. You can see him making that transaction. It's also outside of the normal hands that we've been talking about throughout Genesis 39 and into 40. But that's the dream that he has. And Joseph immediately gives him an interpretation. And the interpretation's quite literal, right? He's not finding a lot of significance here. He just says this. Then Joseph said to him, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Okay, straightforward. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand, and you will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand according to the former custom when you were his cupbearer. That's the interpretation. Straightforward, right? 3 days. After that, you're going to return to your position. You're going to put it back into his hand. Interesting, Joseph changes it, not from palm to hand. Like the hand's what's important here, he's telling this guy. He's going to put it into his hand, cupbearer. That's what you're going to do. Your head is going to be lifted up. Nasa in the Hebrew. What else has been lifted up so far in Joseph? You guys remember? What's been lifted up? It's a really important word in the book. Now, these are some of the details, but it kind of like brings, I guess, greater clarity, right? We're trying to get high definition here as we study the Joseph story. What's been lifted up in the Joseph story? Joseph? Out of the well. Yeah. Yeah. He's been lifted up in prominence. What about the eyes? Remember the eyes? People lift up their eyes to raise Joseph to a high position. We saw this. Verse 21, Genesis 39, verse 21, but the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him and gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer, or literally the chief jailer lifted or put his eyes upon him. You see this with Potiphar's wife as well. Remember this? Genesis 39, verse 7. Now it came about after these events that his master's wife looked at desire with Joseph, but we talked about this as literally lifted up her eyes to Joseph. So you see lifting, right? Lifting the eyes for favor, lifting the eyes for sin. And you see this guy's head is going to be lifted up. He's going to be put into a place of prominence to restore your cup and put in Pharaoh's hand. So you see sometimes the eyes are lifted up for good, sometimes the eyes are lifted up for bad. Here it's for good. And Joseph, in his wisdom, which I think we can see he's starting to mature and grow in wisdom, after you give a favorable dream interpretation, what do you say? Hey, once you're out of here, help me out. This is going to come into account later because he's not going to remember it. And we see this in verse 14. Only keep me in mind, or remember me with yourself. Remember me when it goes well with you. And please do me a kindness. Where have we seen that word before? Kindness? Chesed? Remember? Where do we see this? Genesis 39, verse 21. But the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him and gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. So we see that God's been kind to Joseph, and now Joseph's saying, hey, can you be kind to me? Can you get me out of this dark place? And we know that he's not going to remember, right? Verse 23 of Genesis 40, that the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph but forgot him, right? Who do we trust kindness in ultimately? God. When you're in a dark place, you can try and get out with somebody's help, but in the end, kindness comes from God, right? Looking for kindness in the wrong places. But that's what he asks him. Please do me a kindness by mentioning me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house. And then he makes his story, for I was kidnapped. That's a great translation, for I was taken away. I was stolen from the land of the Hebrews. And even here I have done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon. And interesting, before this has been called the house of the jailer. It's been called the jail. But what does he call it here? He calls it a dungeon. Literally translated, you know what it is? It's pit. Why would this be? I mean, like descriptively, I mean, pits are no good, right? You don't want to be in a pit. But where else has Joseph been in a pit? He got thrown in a pit. Same word. So you see, he's already seeing the providence of God. He's already seeing the connections in his life. We talked about this last time. I joked, he goes from pit to pit. But literally, that's what happens. He goes from the bottom of a dry well to another dry well. Darkness to darkness. He's not seeing it. Only that God's given him any light, any hope. I've been in this pit. Now, this is kind of where the irony in the story starts to happen, and this is played off of we don't know exactly what's going to happen. The characters don't know what's going to happen. If we knew what's going to happen, wouldn't be as funny, but it's going to be real funny here in a second. And sad for this poor chief baker, but he's long dead and gone. Genesis 40:16. When the chief baker saw that he had interpreted when the chief baker saw that he had interpreted favorably, he said to Joseph, "Okay, I want my dream interpreted now." Right? And we smile. Yeah, of course you do, right? I would too. Right? We're in the same prison house, right? We're the same guys. We're the same officials. I'm the chief of this. You're the chief. Who cares? We're all chiefs. We've all had a dream. I think my dream's the same as yours. Is it the same? When the chief baker saw that he had interpreted favorably, he said, "I saw in my dream, behold, there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head." For a baker, if you're going to have bread, I guess it's good to have it on your head, right? That makes sense. You think even figuratively, right? On your head, that's good. And the top basket, there were all sorts of baked food for the Pharaoh. Praise the Lord. You're doing your job. And the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. Now, we might not like birds so much, right? But them, they love birds. They love birds, sign of life. And it makes sense. You're on the Nile. You got birds going all over the place. One bird in particular is just interesting to know. I studied this, and it kind of goes back to Joseph in the past, and I'll mention it here, is the falcon. The falcon is a bird of kings. It's the kingmaker. And you'll actually see this on pharaohs. The pharaohs will have their statues, and they'll have like a bird coming over, right? Sometimes they'll even be portrayed as a bird. Very interesting. Kind of close connection between the word for bird and the word for palm, right? So if Pharaoh is a bird, he extends his palms out. It's kind of an interesting thing for the cupbearer, but I have to study that a little bit more. But anyways, there's a bird on top of him. Birds signify Pharaoh. The falcon's really important. Pharaoh is pictured as a falcon. And if you know this, not only is Pharaoh pictured as a falcon, but the falcon has eyes. And one eye is the sun, and the other eye is the moon. Remember in Joseph earlier, when the 11 stars bow to him, and the sun, and the moon, and his dad is like, "What are you talking about? Your brothers are going to bow to you, I'm going to bow to you, and your mom's dead." Oh, or is it Pharaoh? Interesting side note. Don't know, can't be dogmatic, but certainly interesting historically, and the people would know that. Pharaoh is a falcon with an eye of a sun and a moon. Yes, Jim? Yeah. Falcons were big deals. Birds were big deals, and mostly seen as blessings. So this is pretty good, right? The other dream interpreted pretty literally, 3 days, the vine, the fruit, you're going to squeeze into Pharaoh's cup. And this is where irony works, and this is made for us to kind of stop, and it really is to shock us to say, you think you know, but you don't know. If you're in a dark hole in the ground, don't trust your favor or kindness to anybody else. Trust it to God alone. His word, His revelation is the only thing that you can bet your life on. What about this dream? It's pretty good. If you're going to dream any dream in the house of a prison, it should be this one. This is the one. I'm hitching my cloud to this. I'm hitching my star to this, right? My lottery ticket out of here. I got bread. It's full. I just baked it. You can notice even in the dream, though, he says, Oh, yeah. And they mess us up in the interpretation. Verse 17, and in the top basket there were some of all sorts of baked food. It actually says there was a lot of food in the top basket baked by a baker. But you? Well, we're going to find out. It ain't you. Okay, verse 18. Then Joseph answered and said, this is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. This is where irony works, right? There's a contrast coming. We're like, oh, 3 baskets, 3 days. 3 vines, 3 days. That's good. Within 3 more days, Pharaoh, okay, this is good, same thing he told, will lift up your head. Yes, very good. That's what I want. He will lift up your head from you. From me? What are you talking about? And will hang you on a tree. Oh, no. And the birds will eat your flesh off of you. Oh, that's bad. He's going to lift your head off of you. You can just imagine him going, lift my head off of me? What are you talking about? He's going to hang you, and the birds are going to eat your flesh off. Wow. What should this cause us to do? I mean, it makes me go like, never be a royal official of Pharaoh. That's the first thing, right? Second thing is, even when you think you know the outcome, you don't know the outcome. Only God knows, and He reveals the truth. And if you think you know, He's going to rub it right in your face. So you got to be real careful what you base your faith on. I mean, that's kind of the takeaway here, right? I mean, you can imagine him going, yes, this is what I imagine, and then he says, no, it's going to turn out this way. And this is exactly what happens, right? So it's going to be confirmed. It's not just a Joseph dream that gets him in trouble with his brothers. This is the interpretation. So we actually see that Joseph dreams dreams, and he interprets dreams here in Genesis 40. Thus, it came about on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants. That's just interesting terminology right there. It literally, thus it came about on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast or a banquet for all his slaves. Can't wait for you to come to my birthday. Are you going to be able to make it? I'm a slave. I'm here to celebrate. And he lifted up the head of the chief cupbearer and the head of the chief baker among his servants. We know that one kept their head, the other one it popped off, right? He restored the chief cupbearer to his office, and he put the cup into Pharaoh's palm. But he hanged the chief baker, just as Joseph had interpreted, yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Again, we've read this story probably many times, and maybe there's not a lot of new things we're seeing here. Maybe the term kindness, you didn't see that it connected to chesed. Maybe the whole aspect about them sinning, you didn't see that Joseph sinned. As they sinned against Pharaoh, Joseph didn't want to sin against God. And there's a couple words that we pulled out here. But even underneath the scenes, as the story is written, the writer, the narrator, is very careful to make sure that he reveals the fact that they don't know, you don't know, only God knows. He does it through how he puts us on the same plane with these guys. He does it in the irony that he kind of pulls out at the end, which kind of makes us smile and also go, oh, no. But again, that's Genesis 40, and Joseph interprets the cupbearer and chief cupbearer and baker's dreams, and it's going to really prepare us as well and foreshadow in a lot of ways what's coming in Genesis 41. So, God bless you guys. Thank you. Any thoughts, questions? One more time, Jim? Yeah. Yeah, and you really have to, Yes. 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 And also interesting, right? He must really believe God's word. He must really know that he has a revelation from God, because you're going to tell the head official to Pharaoh, who might be released in 3 days, that he's going to have his head taken off and it doesn't come to fruition. I mean, it's over for you. So he's betting his life on it. It's amazing. Amazing. Really, really cool story. You're dead. You're dead. Yeah, literally. Yeah, and even yeah, that's great. And even I have it down here with irony. There's verbal and dramatic irony. So verbal irony is the words, right? So lift it up, lift it up, lift it up. I'm going to lift you up to prominence. I'm going to lift your head off of you. That would be irony with words. And then there's dramatic irony, just as the scene plays out. Kind of that's all happening within the pit itself. I mean, think about it. If you go to the temple of Ra to have an interpretation from the sun god. And you put on all of your, again, you're going to put on all your special ointments. You're going to look your best as you go to sleep with the sun god. And he's in prison, in a hole in the ground, getting revelation from God. And you're going, whoa, there's power here that the world doesn't understand. This is real revelation. That's the drama of it. That's the drama of the irony. He's giving a real interpretation in a place where you should never have a dream and you should never give a good interpretation. And isn't that what God's truth is? You're in a hole in the ground, He's going to give you the truth. And it's going to help you. So, again. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we discovered today, right? You go to God and you bring yourself, right? Wouldn't it be nice if we could go to God and we could leave ourselves at home? But we go to God and we bring ourselves and we say, God, I want this, and God, I think this, and God says, listen, be quiet, I'm going to tell you what's true. And same thing with Joseph, and it's even, my point is, Jesus says that, Matthew, he says, every jot and tittle will be fulfilled, which means that it's a yod and tittle. So yod is the smallest letter, right? Tittle is kind of like this thing off the daleth. It's just a really small aspect of the letter. It's all going to be fulfilled, which means every detail in the Scriptures, even what's working kind of in the structure of the story, is intended to emphasize God's purpose. Just imagine the story today. If at the beginning of the story we knew that the child was healed. We've read it many times, so we know he's healed. But if we didn't read that, I'm sure there are a couple people in service who are like, is this baby going to live? Like,
isn't that though one of the themes of Christianity? In other words,
yeah.
right, we don't know how many pits we're going to be in. We don't know if I'm in that pit because I, when I was talking about lighting my words,
Right.
Or if I'm going to be in that pit because God has a plan that I'm unaware of. Right?
Yeah.
This may not be something that I've done, because He really doesn't care if you're in a pit.
Mm.
Right? Because he's, in a sense, right, he's accomplishing his goal. And what he wants from us is to trust
Yep.
in whatever that might be. Amen.
Yeah.
Even though what appears to be an injustice towards us is taking place.
Exactly right. Yep.
We may be involved in what is just such an unjust circumstance, right? But we have no idea that God is preparing that person to save Egypt,
Yep.
save Israel. So all of this was a much greater plan that only comes to pass because Joseph was, in some sense, at least from my reading of the story, able to trust the Lord.
That's exactly right.
All of these.
Yeah, even when he doesn't know, he looks to God and he says, this is what God says, we're going to do it. I think a lot of us in the Christian life, we're in a dark pit, we're in darkness, our hearts, the world, Satan, and we find a flashlight, we shove some batteries in it, we turn it on, and we're like, okay, now I can, instead of just being like, why don't I just wait for daytime? And that's the difference between depending upon God's revelation and being a Christian and trying to do it on your own with a little flashlight. Like, you can see everything. So, yeah, praise the Lord, Tom. Thank you guys so much, and I hope you're enjoying the Joseph story. So I'll let you go. I'll pray for you. Our Heavenly Father, I send everybody out with the blessings here. And I'm just grateful for your word and truth, grateful that we can come to Christ as we are, but He changes us forever in and through the power of His word and really the person of His Son, Jesus. And Lord, may these truths comfort us because we're all in a pit. And if we're not, we're going to a hill, we're going to roll right down to another one sooner or later. And we need to be able to trust in your word and be there and be in and with you when times are tough. This allows us to know what's true even when we think, feel, hear, and see things that seem contrary to your word. We praise the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Hey, can we sing the doxology?